There is a theory, popular among the refined comedic circles of the Venathi Broadcast Consortium, that humor is the universe's way of correcting errors in perception. Descolari had built a career on that theory. He had refined it, polished it, structured it into a philosophical framework that underpinned 17 seasons of the most-watched satirical program in the consortium's 40-system broadcast range. He had won the Palatine Crest for comedic achievement twice. He had performed before the High Aesthetic Council. He had made the supreme cultural attaché of the Venathi Commonwealth laugh so hard that the dignitary's secondary vocal membrane had seized, requiring medical intervention and generating the kind of publicity that no amount of credits could buy. Descolari knew comedy the way navigators knew star charts. He understood its geometry, its timing, its load-bearing structures. He knew which tensions could be wound and which would snap. He knew that the best comedy came from the gap between what a subject believed about themselves and what was actually true, and he had spent his career widening that gap for the entertainment of billions. So when his producer, a wiry Tory named Fenwick, whose membranous ears never stopped moving, pitched the idea of a special on humanity's entry into galactic culture, Desk had recognized it immediately for what it was, the richest comedic vein he would ever mine. "They've been in the consortium for less than 2 standard decades," Fenwick had said, pulling up cultural briefs on his display. "They still use physical currency in some of their outpost markets. They eat food that other species classify as industrial solvent. They resolve professional disagreements by raising their voices at each other in enclosed rooms, and then going to consume heated bitter liquid together as though nothing happened." Desk's smooth, pale features had arranged themselves into what his species, the Venathi, called the appreciation configuration, a slight narrowing of his opalescent eyes, a barely perceptible lift at the corners of his lipless mouth. The Venathi were a smooth-skinned, luminescent species whose faces operated on subtlety. Where other species roared or grimaced or bared teeth, the Venathi communicated through shifts in skin luminosity and micro-expressions that required decades to read fluently. They considered themselves the galaxy's most perceptive interpreters of behavior, which made them, in their own estimation, the galaxy's natural comedians. "Which settlement?" Desk had asked. "Verikin Station, Outer Ring. They've got a human commercial quarter that's been growing for about 6 years, maybe 400 humans, mixed with local species. It's messy, it's unregulated, and by every account it's the most chaotic marketplace in the sector." "Perfect, we'll do a 5-rotation immersive, get the cameras embedded. I'll move through the human quarter in character, and let the material come to me." That had been the pitch. The format was one Desk had perfected over 12 seasons, the outsider walk, where he would enter an unfamiliar cultural space, observe its absurdities from the position of refined incomprehension, and build a live special from the material. He had done it with the Dranath Trade Ceremony, the Palathi Moisture Festivals, the Granari mating negotiations. Each time the comedy had written itself, because each time the gap between the subject's self-perception and reality had been enormous, and Desk had walked through that gap with the precision of a surgeon and the timing of a detonator. Humanity would be the masterpiece, he was certain of it. In preparation, he had spent 3 weeks studying the available cultural data on humanity. The consortium species assessment database rated humans as Class 2 developing, commercial practices, non-standardized, cultural integration index, 34 of 100. The database noted their reliance on physical currency, their atypical approach to conflict resolution, their preference for thermal beverages of no identifiable nutritional value, and their persistent use of manual labor in contexts where automation was available. It was, from a satirical standpoint, a gift. Every line of the assessment was a setup waiting for a punchline. Fenwick had compiled a dossier of 8 potential segments, The food practices, the handshake, the manual tool use, the noise levels, the medical approach, the haggling, the concept of the regular customer, and what the database euphemistically called the coffee ritual. Each one was a discrete comedic beat. Together, they would construct a portrait of a species that was endearing, capable, and fundamentally out of step with the galaxy it had entered. Desk had approved the dossier. He had approved it with the confidence of a man who has studied his subject from a distance and believes that distance constitutes understanding. The problems began approximately 40 minutes after his arrival. Desk had disembarked onto Verikin Station's commercial ring with 2 embedded camera drones, Fennec monitoring remotely from the production ship, and a wardrobe selected to broadcast understated Venathi sophistication, a long, fitted coat in slate gray that caught the station light and made his luminescent skin glow faintly against the utilitarian corridor walls. He looked, by design, like a creature of culture visiting a zoo. The human commercial quarter occupied a curved section of the station's mid-ring, between a Tourai freight depot and a decommissioned docking arm that someone had converted into a hydroponic bay. The entrance was marked by a hand-painted sign in the human script unreadable to Desk, though his translation implant rendered it as Market Row Open Daily. Below it, in smaller characters, "Yes, we have coffee." His first observation, the one he had planned to open the special with, was about the noise. The human quarter was loud in a way that defied acoustic modeling. Species that occupied shared commercial spaces typically developed noise management protocols, the Tourai whispered. The Palathi communicated through subsonic pulses in high-traffic areas. The Dranith used hand signals on trading floors. Humans, apparently, had decided that the solution to noise was more noise. They talked over each other, called to each other across open market stalls, laughed at volumes that made Desk's auditory membranes contract, and occasionally broke into what his implant identified as singing, though the tonal structure suggested it was less a performance art and more a spontaneous expression of mood, like a pressure valve releasing steam. He activated his first camera drone, angled it to catch the market's chaotic sprawl behind him, and delivered his opening line to the embedded recorder. "I have arrived," he said, his voice carrying the measured resonance that 17 seasons had perfected, "at what I believe the humans call a market, though by the noise levels I may have accidentally entered a propulsion test facility." It was a solid opener, clean, observational, the kind of line that the Venathi audience would receive with the soft pulse of appreciation that was their equivalent of laughter. The first human he engaged was a vendor selling what appeared to be heated foodstuffs from a stall constructed out of repurposed cargo containers. The vendor was a stocky woman in her 50s with short silver hair, bare forearms despite the station's cool air circulation, and an expression that communicated, even to Desk's Venathi-calibrated perception, absolute indifference to his presence. "Excuse me," Desk said, approaching with the measured glide that his species used for formal introductions. "I'm conducting a cultural study of human commercial practices. Might I ask what you're preparing?" The woman glanced at him. Her eyes moved from his luminescent face to his slate coat to the camera drone hovering behind his left shoulder. She did not appear impressed. "Empanadas," she said. "And what is the cultural significance of the empanada?" "It's lunch." "Ah, and is there a ritual associated with its preparation? A ceremony, perhaps, or a traditional invocation?" The woman picked up a half-moon-shaped pastry, turned it in her hands, crimped the edge with a fork, and dropped it into a vat of heated oil with a hiss that made Desk step back. "I put stuff in dough. I fold it. I fry it. That's the ritual." "Fascinating. And the oil, is it derived from a sacred source, a consecrated?" "It's canola." Behind him, through the earpiece, Fennec's dry voice, "She's not giving you anything. Move on." But Desk had not moved on. He had stood at the empanada stall and watched the woman work, and something about the interaction had snagged on a barb he could not identify. The woman had not been rude, she had not been hostile, she had simply been herself, and herself had not adjusted 1 degree for his presence, his cameras, or his cultural authority. He was accustomed to subjects who either performed for the camera or resisted it. This woman had done neither. She had made empanadas. He catalogued the exchange as a texture piece, a cold opener, and moved deeper into Market Row. 20 meters further in, the market opened into a wider section that functioned as an informal gathering space. Humans and aliens mingled here in a way that Desk's cultural training told him should not work. Vanathi's social spaces were designed with species-specific zones, lighting calibrated for each species' visual range, acoustic dampening for sensitive auditory species, separate refreshment stations. The human quarter had none of this. A Turai freight worker with sensitive membranous ears sat beside a boisterous human welder whose voice carried across the entire space. A Pelathi moisture farmer shared a bench with a Dranith who was eating something that smelled, to Desk's senses, like industrial cleaning agent. Nobody appeared uncomfortable. Nobody had requested species-specific accommodation. They had simply adjusted shifted chairs, modulated volumes, made space the way water adjusts around rocks in a stream. Desk recorded an observation. The human concept of shared space appears to involve no planning, no protocol, and no complaint. One suspects they simply haven't discovered that discomfort is an option. A Turai child ran past him, chased by a human child of approximately the same age. The Turai child's membranous ears were flared with laughter. The human child was shouting something that the translation implant rendered as "you're it," apparently a game whose rules consisted of touching someone and then running away. Desk watched the children weave through the market, collide with a produce display, get scolded simultaneously by a Turai vendor and a human vendor who spoke different languages, and yet communicated the same parental displeasure with identical intonation, and resume their game 30 seconds later. Nobody filed a complaint. Nobody consulted a youth interaction protocol. The children played. Note to self, Desk murmured. Human children appear to regard other species' children as simply more children. I will investigate whether this is naivete or whether the alternative regarding them as fundamentally different is the actual aberration. He filed the thought beside the empanada thought. The pile was growing. His next subject was 3 stalls down from the gathering space. A tall human man in work coveralls who was selling reconditioned atmospheric filters from a neatly organized bay. The man was explaining a product to a Pelathi customer with the kind of detailed technical knowledge that Desk associated with engineers, not vendors. The gasket seats here, the man was saying, pointing to a component on a filter housing. Standard Tessic spec uses a polymer that degrades at high humidity. If you're running a wet atmosphere station, you want the ceramic-seated version. Costs about 9% more, but it'll last 4 times as long, and you won't be replacing gaskets every quarter. The Pelathi's filmy eyes widened. Why doesn't the Tessic catalog list the ceramic option? Because the Tessic catalog was written for dry spec installations. Nobody updated it for wet environment species, because wet environment species represent a small market share. Small market share doesn't justify catalog revisions, according to the people who write catalogs. So how do you stock them? I asked a Pelathi engineer what kept failing. She told me, I found a supplier, now I keep them. Desk recognized the pattern immediately. It was the comedic target he had identified in his preliminary research. The human tendency to solve problems through direct, personal, stubbornly individual effort rather than through systemic optimization. A Vanathi merchant would have identified the market gap through data modeling, sourced the product through an optimized supply chain, and priced it according to demand elasticity curves. This human had asked somebody what kept breaking. Delightfully primitive, he murmured into his recorder. The human solves systemic problems through conversation. One imagines they also debug their navigation computers by asking the computer how it feels. It was a good line. Fennec approved it. The drone captured it cleanly. The problem was that the Palathi engineer bought 12 filters, and the look on her face as she left was not the look of a customer who had been served by a primitive. It was the look of a customer who had been seen. Desk filed the observation and moved on. He found his third subject in the market's eastern curve, a human carpenter, an actual carpenter, working with physical tools on physical materials, repairing a structural beam in the overhead framework. The carpenter was an older man with scarred hands who worked without plans, without a fabrication drone, without a holographic template. He measured with his eyes. He cut with a manual tool that produced a rhythmic scraping sound. He fitted joints by feel, running his calloused fingers along the grain of the composite wood until the pieces mated with a precision that made Desk's skin dim in involuntary surprise. Desk positioned his drone to capture the carpenter from a low angle, emphasizing the manual tools against the station's gleaming technology visible in the background. "The human builds the way his ancestors built," he recorded. "By hand, by instinct, by what I can only describe as an obstinate refusal to accept that machines do it better. One wonders whether the species simply enjoys the unnecessary labor, or whether they haven't noticed that automation exists." He watched for another 8 minutes. In that time, the carpenter completed a joint that fit with zero visible tolerance gap. A Turai structural engineer who happened to be passing stopped, examined the joint, and asked the carpenter how he had achieved the fit without a micrometer. "I can feel when it's right," the carpenter said. The Turai had purchased the carpenter's consulting services for a structural project on the spot, paying 3 times the rate a consortium-certified fabrication service would have charged. Desk's skin pulsed once, the Venathi equivalent of a blink of confusion. He recorded the observation. The human's anachronism is apparently billable. The fourth subject arrived unbidden. A human medic operated a small clinic in a converted cargo pod at the market's northern edge. Desk had planned to visit the clinic later in his schedule, but a commotion drew him. A Dranith freight handler had collapsed with what appeared to be a respiratory seizure outside the clinic door, and the medic, a young woman with dark braided hair and a voice that communicated calm even before she spoke, was already beside him, one knee on the deck plating, 2 fingers pressed to the gray skin of the Dranith's throat. Desk activated both drones. This was raw material. The medic treated the Dranith seizure with a combination of a manually administered bronchodilator and a nerve-calming technique that Desk's medical database identified as acupressure, physical pressure applied to specific points on the body. It was, by consortium medical standards, comically primitive. The consortium's standard emergency protocol for a Dranith respiratory seizure involved a diagnostic scan, an algorithmic treatment recommendation, and an automated drug delivery system. The medic used her hands. In 4 minutes, the Dranith was breathing normally. In 6, he was sitting up. In 8, the medic was asking him about his work schedule, his diet, his sleep patterns, and whether anyone in his family had a history of respiratory illness. She took notes on a handheld pad, not a diagnostic database. She asked his name. She used it 3 times in the conversation that followed. When the Dranith mentioned that the station's air mix made his breathing worse during the 3rd shift, the medic made a note to contact the station's environmental systems office about Dranith-specific atmospheric adjustments. "Tell me," Desk said, approaching her between patients, "your clinic operates without a diagnostic AI." The medic looked at him with brown eyes that held in their depths the particular quality of patients that Desk was beginning to associate specifically with humans. "I have a portable diagnostic unit, but it's a tool, not a doctor. I'm the doctor." and you treat multiple species from a single clinic, without specialist training in each species' physiology. I trained for 4 years on interspecies emergency medicine. Plus, I read constantly. Plus, I ask my patients questions, and if I don't know something, I find someone who does. How delightfully personal. That's the point. Desk had captured, by the end of his first rotation, approximately 14 hours of material. He reviewed it that evening in his quarters on the production ship, marking segments for the special, annotating comedic beats, structuring the narrative arc from bemusement through escalating incredulity to a concluding observation about the charming futility of human individualism, in a galaxy that had solved these problems centuries ago through systems and algorithms. It was going to be brilliant. Except that something kept pulling at his attention the way a loose thread pulls at a garment. Every interaction he had recorded shared a quality that his comedic framework could not categorize. The empanada vendor's flat indifference, the filter seller's knowledge of a Palathi engineer's specific problem, the carpenter's scarred hands, the medic's memory for names. These were not the behaviors of a species that didn't know better. They were the behaviors of a species that had chosen. He filed the thought. He did not sleep well. The second rotation was when the chase began. Desk had planned to spend it collecting the centerpiece segment, the human concept of the deal. His research indicated that humans, uniquely among galactic commercial species, still relied heavily on verbal agreements sealed by physical contact, the handshake. This was, by Venathi standards, spectacularly absurd. Venathi contracts were holographic, encrypted, triple-witnessed, and registered in the Commonwealth's permanent archive. A verbal agreement sealed by touching hands was, to Desk, roughly equivalent to sealing a hull breach with good intentions. He found his target in the market's western curve, a human merchant named Tomas who ran a general supply stall that served both human and alien customers. Tomas was in his 40s, lean, sun-darkened even under the station's artificial lighting, with a way of standing weight on one foot, arms crossed, head slightly tilted that communicated a permanent state of unhurried readiness. Desk approached with his camera drone visible. Tomas looked at the drone, looked at Desk, and said, "You're the comedian. You've heard of me. Marta told me, the empanada lady. She said you asked if her cooking oil was sacred. I was exploring cultural. She told everyone. It's the funniest thing that's happened on Market Row in a month. You want to buy something, or are you here to ask if my inventory management system is a religious practice?" Behind him through the earpiece Fennec, "He's baiting you, turn it around." But Desk was not certain the human was baiting him. The words were playful, but the tone was not hostile. It was the tone of someone inviting a conversation, not deflecting one. "I'm here to observe," Desk said, recovering his composure with the speed of a veteran performer. "I understand that your species seals commercial agreements with a physical gesture, the handshake. I'd like to understand why. Why we shake hands. Why you shake hands instead of using a contractual framework. You're aware that the consortium offers a standardized commercial agreement protocol that provides legal protection, dispute resolution, and archival verification." Tomas uncrossed his arms. He looked at Desk with an expression that sat precisely on the line between amusement and something older. "You want me to explain why I shake hands? If it's not too primitive a question. You know what happens when I shake someone's hand. I look them in the eye. I feel whether their grip is firm or weak. I feel whether their hand is dry or sweating. I feel whether they mean it. And they feel the same things about me. All of that happens in about 2 seconds. No algorithm, no contract. Just two people telling each other, I'm real, I'm here, and I mean what I'm saying. And if one of you is lying, then I find out and I don't shake their hand again. And neither does anyone else on Market Row because word gets around. That's the contract, not a holographic archive. a reputation. Desk had his drone capture the entire exchange. It was excellent material, the kind of earnest, unself-conscious sincerity that played beautifully against the backdrop of Venathi's sophistication. He could already hear the editing notes. Cut to Tomas's serious face, then to the absurdly simple handshake, then to Desk's reaction, a slow dimming of his luminescent skin, the Venathi expression of incredulous amusement. Over the next 4 hours, Desk watched Tomas close 6 separate deals. Each one cracked his framework a little further. The first was a Tourai navigator who needed replacement conduit wiring for an aging freighter. Tomas did not have the exact grade in stock, but knew a Granari supplier 3 bays down who did. He walked the Tourai to the supplier's stall, introduced them, verified the product, negotiated a fair price on the Tourai's behalf, and took no commission. Why? Desk asked afterward. Because the Tourai will come back to me for something I do carry. And the Granari will send overflow customers my way, and both of them will tell people that Tomas on Market Row helped them out. That's not a business strategy, that's altruism. It's Thursday. The second deal was with a young Venathi diplomat, a junior attaché posted to Verikin Station's Cultural Liaison Office. Desk recognized the species markers. Smooth, pale skin with a faint azure luminescence, the formal posture of someone trained in Venathi's social protocol. She was purchasing atmospheric supplements for her quarters. The station's air mix was slightly off composition for Venathi respiratory comfort, and the standard consortium supplier charged a significant premium for the specialty product. Tomas sold her the supplements at cost. Why at cost? Desk's skin dimmed. Because she's new. She's far from home. She's spending her personal stipend on air she can breathe, and nobody should have to pay a premium for breathing. That's not a business model. It's not supposed to be. The third involved a Palathi station maintenance worker whose humidity regulator had failed. Tomas spent 45 minutes on his communication terminal, calling 3 suppliers across 2 systems, locating a compatible unit 1 transit jump away, and absorbing the expedited shipping cost himself. You spent 45 minutes and accepted a financial loss to help a customer whose total purchase history with you amounts to less than the shipping charge, Desk observed, his skin now cycling through the dim-bright-dim pattern that indicated cognitive dissonance. Her humidity regulator failed. She's a Palathi. Dry air hurts. What was I going to do? Tell her to wait 3 weeks. The fourth deal was with a Dranath hull plating supplier named Borusk, who had brought sample plates priced at 22% above index. Tomas stripped the Dranath's negotiating position in 4 sentences. Your limited run has been on the listing for 14 weeks, which means your other buyers haven't committed, and every week it sits, your holding costs eat another half point, and then offered terms that served both of them. Fair price, guaranteed quarterly volume, a long-term supplier relationship. Borusk, who by every account of Dranath commercial culture should have demanded a formal stamped trade tag ceremony with witnesses, extended his hand. Tomas took it. Deal closed. The fifth was the one that stopped Desk in his tracks. A young Tourai freighter operator, membranous ears folded, clearly embarrassed, brought in a failed hull sealant tube that she had not purchased from Tomas. She had come to him anyway because, she said, "You're the only vendor who answers questions." Tomas examined the sealant, identified the batch defect, contacted the original vendor on her behalf, and arranged a replacement shipment to her next port of call. No charge. When she asked why, Tomas said, "Because next time you need sealant, you'll buy it from me, and I'd rather earn your business than charge you for fixing someone else's problem." The sixth was the simplest. A human freighter captain needed hull sealant for a patch job. Tomas and the captain negotiated for 12 seconds, and closed with a handshake. The captain left with 3 tubes and a data chip of application instructions. 12 seconds, No contract, no algorithm, a handshake and a tube of sealant. Desk stayed 2 more hours after the sixth deal because Tomas had introduced him to a phenomenon he had no cultural framework for: the return customer. A Vorani pilot came in, feathered crest bright against the market's artificial light, and Tomas greeted her by name. Not by species, by name. Captain Neshka, the thermal composite batch from last quarter holding up at the waypoint. The captain's crest feathers rippled in the Vorani expression of pleased recognition. They spent 8 minutes discussing her fleet's seasonal route changes and how the temperature variance at a particular waypoint affected her hull coating. Tomas made notes, actual handwritten notes, on a physical pad, in a system that appeared to consist of the human memory augmented by ink. "You have a customer relationship management database," Desk said after the captain left. "I have a notebook. That notebook is your database. That notebook is my memory. The difference is that a database tracks what they bought. The notebook tracks what they need. Your consortium's TESIC predictive engine tracks customer needs. It models purchasing patterns across 400 variables. Does it track that Captain Neshka's daughter just graduated from the Vorani Navigation Academy?" Desk paused. "No. I know that because she told me last time she was in, while I was checking her composite order. She's proud. Her daughter is the first in their convoy group to qualify. And when Neshka comes back next quarter, I'll ask how the daughter is doing, because I actually want to know, and because Neshka will remember that I asked, and that memory is worth more than a 2% pricing advantage." Then came a young Vakari trader, shell smooth, only 4 trademarks etched into the carapace. He needed hull sealant but clearly could not afford the premium grade. Desk watched Tomas see it the way the young trader handled the premium sample, turning it, reading the price, setting it down with careful resignation. Tomas reached for a mid-grade product. "This one won't match premium out of the tube," Tomas said. "But if you apply a secondary coat after the first layer cures, and I'll show you how you get about 90% of premium performance at 60% of the cost. The trick is the curing time. Most people apply the second coat too early. You need to wait 4 hours." Tomas pulled out a printed instruction sheet, hand-formatted, with clear diagrams, and walked the young captain through it. Then he gave the young trader a tube of secondary coating compound for free. "First-time customer discount," Tomas said. "You don't have a first-time customer discount," Desk observed from beside the stall. "I do now." The young trader left with his sealant, his free tube, his printed instructions, and an expression that Desk recognized because he had seen it on the faces of young Venathi performers after their first successful show. The expression of someone who has just discovered that the world contains people who will help you without requiring that you earn it first. That young trader would buy from Tomas for the rest of his career. Desk could project the trajectory as clearly as any algorithmic model. The young captain would build his fleet, accumulate trademarks, hire crew, and at every decision point where he needed composite or sealant, the memory of the human who had shown him how to apply a secondary coat would sit at the front of his mind, not as a calculation, as a fact about the world. Between customers, Tomas cleaned. He reorganized display samples. He updated a hand-kept ledger and actual physical book with written entries which Desk found so archaic it bordered on performance art. The human kept 2 sets of records, a digital manifest for inventory tracking and a handwritten log of every customer interaction. Names, ship classes, operating conditions, problems mentioned, solutions provided, follow-up needed. Late in the afternoon, something happened that the drones did not capture because Desk had forgotten to reposition them. A Grenari bulk freight operator named Keswick arrived at the stall carrying a datapad loaded with a procurement list 37 line items for a fleet refit. The kind of bulk order that would have taken Desk's own species commercial systems approximately 4 hours to process through competitive bidding algorithms. supplier selection matrices, and delivery optimization protocols. Tomas looked at the list. He did not consult a screen or a database. He ran his finger down the items, pausing at 3. I can fill 34 of these from stock. 2, I'd need to source the reinforced conduit gaskets and the heavy-grade thermal tape. And this one, he pointed to the 37th item, you don't actually want. Keswick's mandibles worked. That's on the procurement list from my operations chief. Your operations chief spec'd a Type 9 atmospheric filter for your cargo bays. The Type 9 is designed for pressurized crew compartments. Your cargo bays run at half atmosphere during transit. You told me that 6 months ago when you bought your last round of filters. At half atmosphere, the Type 9's flow restrictor is too tight. You'll get pressure drop warnings every 40 hours. What you want is the Type 7 with a modified restrictor plate. Costs 11% less, and it'll run clean for the full service interval. Keswick stared at him. My operations chief has been specifying the wrong filter. Your operations chief is specifying the right filter for the wrong application. The Keswick catalog doesn't differentiate between crew compartment and cargo bay atmospheric requirements for that filter class. It's a catalog gap, not an engineering error. And you know this because you told me your operating profile, and I remembered it. Keswick closed the order on 37 items, 36 from Tomas, plus 1 sourced from a secondary supplier Tomas contacted while they talked. The Granari paid, received a delivery timeline, and left with a handwritten note that Tomas added to every bulk order, a sheet listing each item, its installation specs, and a contact number in case anything did not perform as promised. The contact number was Tomas's personal communication line, not a customer service queue, not an automated response system. His personal line, which he had answered himself for 6 years on Verican Station, which he would continue answering himself because the alternative, the efficient alternative, the systematic alternative was a queue, and a queue was a place where a customer waited instead of being helped. Desk stood beside the stall and watched Keswick leave, and he felt something shift behind his luminescent skin that he did not have a Venathi aesthetic term for. It was not the appreciation configuration. It was not the incredulity pattern. It was something new, something that his species' finely calibrated system of microexpressions had not been designed to communicate, because the Venathi had never expected to need it. The closest approximation was the expression a student shows when a teacher demonstrates something so simple and so fundamental that the student's only response is to wonder how they ever graduated without learning it. Desk returned to the production ship that evening and sat in the editing suite for 3 hours without editing anything. The material was perfect. Every segment he had captured was precisely what the special needed. Humans behaving in ways that were, by consortium standards, primitive, inefficient, unsystematic, and stubbornly personal. Each one was a comedy segment waiting to be assembled: the sophisticated Venathi observer, the charmingly backward humans, the gap between systemic elegance and handmade chaos. It was perfect, and Desk could not cut it. Because the gap he was supposed to be exploiting, the gap between what the humans believed about themselves and what was actually true, did not exist. The humans on Market Row were not deluded about their methods. They knew that algorithms existed. They knew that systemic optimization was available. They knew that contractual frameworks and predictive engines could do in milliseconds what they did in hours. They had chosen the hours. They had chosen to remember names, to walk a customer to a competitor's stall, to sell supplements at cost because a young diplomat shouldn't have to pay a premium for air, to spend 45 minutes finding a humidity regulator for a Palathi whose breathing hurt, to shake hands and mean it. The comedy that Desk had planned required that these choices be foolish, the charming mistakes of a species too young to know better. The audience would laugh at the quaintness and return to their optimized lives feeling confirmed. But the choices were not foolish, and Desk, who had spent his career in the space between perception and truth, knew the difference. On the third rotation, he went back without the camera drones. Fennec's voice in his earpiece. "What are you doing? We need footage. The special airs in 19 days. "I'm doing research." Research without cameras. The kind of research the cameras interfere with. He found Tomas before the market opened. The human was arranging his stall with methodical care products grouped by use case, not product code. Handwritten labels in multiple scripts, a pot of coffee heating on a portable element. "No cameras today," Tomas observed. "No cameras today." Tomas poured him a cup of coffee without being asked. The liquid was dark, bitter, and punishingly hot. Desk drank it because refusing would have communicated something he did not wish to communicate. "I have a problem," Desk said. "I figured. My special is supposed to be comedy. The sophisticated outsider visits the primitive culture and finds humor in the gap between what they believe and what's true. And there's no gap." Tomas sipped his coffee. He had the human quality of allowing silence to hold its own weight. "What did you expect to find?" Tomas asked. "Inefficiency, naivete. A species that hadn't learned to use the tools the galaxy offers." "And what did you find?" Desk's skin cycled through 3 luminosity shifts. "A species that uses the tools and chooses to set them down." "That bothers you." "It ruins my special." Tomas laughed not at Desk but with the situation. It was the same quality of laughter Desk had heard from the empanada vendor, from the medic, from the carpenter. Not performance, something genuine. "Let me tell you something," Tomas said. "You came here to make fun of us. That's fine. We're used to it. Every species that comes through here looks at us the same way. How can they still do it like that?" And the answer is always the same, and nobody ever believes it until they've been here long enough. What's the answer? The algorithm handles the transaction. It doesn't handle the person. The Venathi would argue that handling the transaction is handling the person. The Venathi would argue that because the Venathi have never had a customer bring them a broken part that wasn't their fault and say, "I came to you because you're the only one who listens." The Venathi have never had a Palathi engineer cry with relief because someone finally stocked the part that works in her environment. Desk set his coffee down. "You're telling me that your competitive advantage is that you care. I'm telling you that caring is not a competitive advantage. It's not a strategy. It's what we do. We're not optimized. We're not efficient. We're present." Present. Here, same stall, same face, same handshake, every day. And when the algorithm breaks, because it always breaks eventually, because algorithms don't know that a Palathi needs marine-grade alloy or a young captain needs someone to show him how to apply a sealant coat when the algorithm breaks, we're still here. Desk spent the rest of the morning walking Market Row without his professional armor. Without the drones, the market treated him differently. Not better, the market had never treated him badly. But the difference was the same one that exists between a room that contains a recording device and a room that doesn't. People relaxed. They argued about pricing in front of him. They told each other off-color jokes that his translation implant could not fully parse. They complained about the station's docking fees and the Turai Freight Depot's scheduling system, and the way the water pressure dropped every third shift. He learned that Marta, the empanada vendor, was the unofficial mayor of Market Row. Not through any formal authority, but through the simple fact that she had been there longest, and that her opinion, delivered flatly and without diplomatic padding, was trusted by everyone. When 2 vendors had a dispute about stall boundaries, Marta walked out from behind her fryer, listened to both sides for approximately 90 seconds, delivered a verdict consisting of 1 sentence, and went back to her empanadas. Both vendors accepted the ruling without argument. "Why do they listen to you?" Desk asked her. "Because I've been here since before this quarter had a name, and because I don't lie. If your stall is in the wrong spot, I'll tell you. If your product is bad, I'll tell you. If your empanadas are better than mine, I'll tell you that too, but it hasn't happened yet." He learned that the carpenter's name was Vasily, and that he had been a structural engineer in his former life, trained in digital fabrication and computational design, who had given it up voluntarily. "Why?" Desk asked. Vasily set down his hand tool and looked at him with the expression of a man who has answered this question before and does not mind answering it again. "Because the computer makes the joint." "I make the joint. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" Vasily picked up a piece of composite wood. He ran his thumb along its edge, feeling the grain. "The computer makes a joint that's within tolerance. I make a joint that's right. Tolerance is a range. Right is a point. The computer can't tell the difference. I can." He learned that the medic's name was Ray's and that she kept a handwritten log of every patient she had treated, names, conditions, follow-ups needed, allergies, family histories. The log was 340 pages. She had been on Verikin Station for 4 years. "The consortium medical system keeps these records automatically," Desk said. "The consortium system keeps records. I keep notes. Records are data. Notes are context. When a Turai freight handler comes in with respiratory trouble, the consortium system tells me his blood oxygen levels and his species baseline and the standard treatment protocol. My notes tell me that he works third shift in the cargo bay where the air circulation drops by 18%, that he has 2 children who wake him during his sleep cycle, that he hasn't been eating properly because the station's cafeteria doesn't serve food compatible with his species' nutritional requirements after second shift, and that the respiratory trouble is not a medical event, it's a lifestyle collapse. The treatment for a medical event is a bronchodilator. The treatment for a lifestyle collapse is a conversation with the station's environmental engineer and a referral to the Turai Community Kitchen on level 3. You treat the context, not the symptom. I treat the person." He sat in her clinic while she treated a Turai child's ear infection and sang a quiet song in a language the child did not understand but responded to anyway, because the melody communicated what the words did not need to. He watched Vasily finish a beam repair, step back, run his scarred hand along the joint, and nod with quiet satisfaction. He ate an empanada. It was extraordinary. "What is in this?" he asked the vendor. "Stuff." "Could you be more specific?" "Beef, onions, olives, raisins, cumin, my mother's recipe." "You're not going to ask if the cumin is sacred, are you?" "No." "Good, you want another one." He had 3. On the 4th rotation, he received a communication that changed the trajectory of the special entirely. The Venathi Broadcast Consortium Standards Division had flagged his production schedule. His preliminary segment logs, filed automatically by the drone system, had been reviewed by an algorithmic content assessment tool, and the tool had rated the material as insufficient satirical distance. The note, in the clipped bureaucratic prose of Consortium Standards Review, stated, "Current footage suggests a shift towards sympathetic portraiture rather than observational comedy." Reminder: the outsider walk format requires maintained critical distance from the subject culture. Sympathetic identification with the subject constitutes a format violation and may result in reassignment of the production slot. Desk read it twice. "They're going to pull the special," Fennick said, his ears flattened. "They're going to pull it because a machine decided I'm not being mean enough. They're going to pull it because the machine is right. Your footage ratio has shifted. Rotation 1, you had 70% observational, 30% ambient. Rotation 3, you had 15% observational and 85% ambient. The algorithm reads that as sympathetic drift." The algorithm reads my professional judgment as a data point. Desk. You know how the consortium works. The algorithm doesn't care about your judgment. It cares about the audience retention model, and the retention model predicts that sympathetic portraiture underperforms observational satire by 14% in the core Venathi demographic. The retention model has never watched a carpenter fit a joint by feel. Fennec's ears lifted slowly. You're going to fight this. I'm going to finish my special. The fourth rotation became the pivot point. Desk went back to Market Row with his cameras, but he changed the lens. Not the physical lens, the conceptual one. Instead of pointing the observation at the humans and letting the Venathi audience look down, he turned the observation on himself, on Venathi assumptions, on the consortium's systemic confidence, on the algorithmic certainty that had become so pervasive that an entire civilization had forgotten what it felt like to be asked how your daughter was doing. He reshot every segment. The empanada vendor became the opener, but the comedy was no longer about the simplicity of her cooking. It was about a professional satirist asking a woman whether canola oil was sacred while she was making lunch. The carpenter became a segment about precision, not the absence of technology, but the presence of skill, and the ridiculousness of a species that builds diagnostic drones but cannot feel whether a joint is true. The medic became a segment about the consortium's medical referral system, which could route a patient to the correct specialist within 0.4 seconds but could not remember their name. Tomas became the centerpiece. Desk filmed their conversation about handshakes, but he cut so the comedy ran against himself. Every beat of Venathi superiority was now visible as what it was, a sophisticated species, assuming that sophistication was the same as wisdom. On the fifth rotation, Desk shot the final pickup segments he needed. He filmed himself attempting to navigate the consortium's standardized commercial agreement protocol for a simple purchase, 17 authentication steps, 4 identity verification queries, a cooling period waiver, a terms of sale acknowledgement, a digital witness registration. The process took 11 minutes. In split screen, Tomas closed the same deal with a handshake in 8 seconds. The contrast played like a masterclass in unintentional comedy. He filmed the consortium's medical referral system in action. He submitted a test query for a Venathi respiratory complaint. The system routed the query through 3 triage layers, 2 specialist referral protocols, and an insurance authorization step before returning a recommendation. Elapsed time, 14 minutes. Reyes had treated the same condition in 4, using her hands and her memory and a song. He filmed Marta making empanadas. This time, he did not ask about ritual or ceremony. He simply let the camera watch. Marta's hands moved with the economy of 30 years' practice, folding, crimping, dropping into the oil, and the footage had the quality of something ancient and precise, a craft that predated every algorithm the consortium had ever produced and would outlast them all. That afternoon, the standards division sent a second notice. The algorithmic assessment had been updated. His new footage was rated format non-compliant. Subject has become the observer. The note recommended immediate production suspension. Desk composed a reply. He drafted it 7 times. The final version was 3 sentences. The format compliance of my special is a creative decision, not an algorithmic one. The outsider walk has always been about finding the gap between perception and truth. This time, I found that the gap was mine. Fennec transmitted it. Fennec also, without telling Desk, transmitted a backup copy of all raw footage to a personal archive drive, because Fennec was a Turai and Turai believed in contingency plans. The standards division's response arrived 4 hours later. The production slot was suspended pending a format compliance hearing. If found non-compliant, the slot would be reassigned to a comedian who maintained appropriate satirical distance. Desk received the news standing in Market Row. eating an empanada. Marta watched him read the message. Bad news, she asked. My network may cancel my special. Why? Because a machine decided I stopped being funny in the right direction. Marta considered this. You want another empanada? Yes. Then sit down. You look like someone punched your light out. He sat on a cargo crate beside her stall and ate the empanada, and she told him about her grandmother, who had run a street food cart in a city called Mendoza for 37 years without ever changing the recipe, without ever writing it down, without ever explaining to anyone why the empanadas tasted the way they did. She just knew, Marta said, the way your carpenter knows when a joint is right, the way Tomas knows when a handshake is good. You can't optimize that. You can only do it every day until it's part of you. That's terrifying, Desk said. Why? Because we've spent 2,000 years building systems to make sure no one has to know, to make sure the algorithm knows for them. And you're telling me that the knowing is the point. The knowing is the point. Tomas appeared from inside the stall, carrying a crate of replacement thermal tape. He set it on the counter, saw Desk and Marta sitting together, and said nothing. He poured himself a cup of coffee, sat on the other end of the cargo crate, and joined the silence. After a while, Desk said, If I make this special the way it needs to be made, my network will fight me. They'll say I've lost my edge. They'll say I've been compromised by proximity to the subject. Have you? Tomas asked. I've been corrected by proximity to the subject. In my profession, that's worse. Why worse? Because a compromised comedian can be reassigned. A corrected comedian has to start over. He has to rebuild everything he thinks he knows about what's funny, and he has to do it in front of an audience that paid to see the old version. Tomas drank his coffee. That sounds like a craft problem. It is a craft problem. Then solve it like a craftsman, not like an algorithm. The simplicity of it landed like a joint fitted by feel, not within tolerance, but right. Desk set his cup down, stood up, and for the first time in his career felt the weight of professional certainty lift from him like a coat he had not realized he was wearing. What remained underneath was lighter, rougher, closer to the truth. I need to go argue with some arbiters, he said. Take an empanada for the trip, Marta said. You get stupid when you're hungry. He took two. Desk flew back to the Commonwealth for the format compliance hearing. He brought Fennec. He brought 3 hours of edited footage. He brought a prepared statement that he revised 4 times during the transit and ultimately discarded. The hearing chamber was a formal Venathi adjudication space, curved walls of polished mineral composite, soft overhead luminescence calibrated to the Venathi visual comfort range, 5 elevated seats for the arbiters. Desk had performed in larger rooms. He had never been more conscious of the size of one. The panel was 5 senior Venathi cultural arbiters. Tessalith, the senior arbiter, occupied the center seat. Her skin was the color of bleached coral, and her expression had not shifted once in the 4 hearings Desk had watched her preside over in his career. She was known for 2 things: absolute fairness and absolute intolerance for sentimentality. The consortium's cultural standards were, in her public statements, the architecture of perception, not its decoration. They watched the footage in silence, the algorithmic compliance report projected beside the screen flagging each segment, sympathetic identification, reduced satirical distance, format non-compliant. By the end, the flags occupied more screen space than the footage itself. Arbiter Velos, seated to Tessalith's left, spoke first. The format is the outsider walk. The outsider walk requires the comedian to maintain observational distance. Your footage shows progressive integration with the subject culture. This is not observational comedy. This is ethnography. Ethnography with a point of view, Desk replied. The point of view is sympathetic. The format requires satirical. These are not compatible. The format requires that I find the gap between what the subject believes and what's true. The gap is there. It's just not where anyone, including me, expected it to be. Velos's skin shifted to a cooler spectrum. You're asking us to approve a comedy special where the comedian is the joke. I'm asking you to approve a comedy special where the comedian discovers that his sophistication was the punch line. The chamber went quiet. Tessalith had not spoken. She had watched the footage with the same expression she brought to everything: mineral calm, the face of someone who had spent decades calibrating perception and trusted it completely. "Play the segment with the carpenter," Tessalith said. Fennec cued it. The segment ran for 7 minutes, Vasily measuring by eye, cutting by hand, fitting the joint, running his thumb along the edge. Then Desk's voice. The human builds the way his ancestors built. Then the Turai engineer stopping, examining the joint, hiring Vasily on the spot. Tessalith watched it twice. "Play the segment with the medic and the Turai child." Fennec cued it, Ray's singing softly, the child's ear infection, the child responding to the melody. Tessalith watched it once. "The format," she said, and every arbiter in the chamber leaned forward slightly, "exists to serve the truth, not the other way around." She turned to the panel. "Vote." They approved the special. The vote was 4-1. The one dissenter cited insufficient comedic density in the middle third. Desk considered this legitimate feedback. He returned to Verikin Station one final time, specifically to capture 2 additional segments. The first was an experiment. He hired a consortium-certified commercial analyst to process a standard procurement order using the TESIC predictive engine's full optimization protocol: supplier selection, competitive bidding, delivery scheduling, contract generation. The process took 6 hours and 22 minutes and produced a 47-page optimized procurement package. Then he gave Tomas the same procurement list. Tomas filled the order in 90 minutes. He sourced every item from suppliers he knew personally, negotiated prices that undercut the engine's optimized bids by an average of 4%, scheduled deliveries that arrived faster because his suppliers prioritized him, not because of contractual incentives, but because he had spent years building relationships with people who liked working with him. The procurement package consisted of a handshake, a handwritten summary, and Tomas's personal communication line for follow-up. 47 pages versus a handshake, 6 hours versus 90 minutes, the consortium's most sophisticated tool versus a man who remembered names. The second segment was simpler and, in the end, more devastating. Desk recorded a 90-second conversation between Tomas and the Palathi maintenance worker, whose humidity regulator he had sourced 4 rotations earlier. The Palathi had returned to tell Tomas that the replacement unit was working perfectly and that her station's air quality had improved measurably. Tomas asked how her crew was handling the change. She told him about a junior technician who had been considering a transfer. Because of the air quality, the transfer was now off the table. One humidity regulator, sourced in 45 minutes at a personal loss, had kept a crew together. The consortium's customer satisfaction algorithm would have classified this as a retention-neutral microcount event. Tomas classified it as a conversation with someone whose air had stopped hurting. The special aired on schedule. Desk opened it with a line he had written on his last morning on Verikin Station, standing outside Marta's stall with a cup of terrible coffee and the residue of 5 days' worth of corrected assumptions. "I went to a human market to find comedy," he told the camera. "I found it, but the joke was on me. I went looking for a species that hadn't caught up to the rest of the galaxy. I found a species that the rest of the galaxy hasn't caught up to. They don't use our algorithms because they've built something better. They've built trust, one handshake at a time, in a galaxy that forgot what a handshake means." The special polled the highest single broadcast audience of the season. The cultural feeds ran commentary for 16 days. 3 competing Venathi comedians released response specials within the month, each attempting to prove that Desk had been duped by sentimentality, that the humans were indeed as primitive as they appeared, and that their chosen inefficiency was simply inefficiency wearing a better hat. Each response special underperformed its predecessor. The audiences did not want to laugh at the humans. They wanted to understand what Desk had understood. Something else happened that Desk did not anticipate. The Pelathi Commerce Board, after reviewing the segment about the filter seller and the marine-grade alloy, commissioned a study of their own procurement systems. The study found that 43 product categories in the TESIC catalog lacked specifications for wet environment species. The filter seller's solution, asking a Pelathi engineer what kept breaking, had identified a systemic failure that the consortium's entire certification apparatus had missed for 11 years. The Dranath Trade Guild requested a copy of the segment where Borusk shook Tomas's hand. They did not explain why. 3 months later, a junior amendment to the Guild's formal trading protocol appeared, an optional informal acknowledgement addendum that allowed Dranath traders to supplement the stamped trade tag ceremony with a direct physical greeting if both parties consented. The amendment was footnoted with a single reference. C. Olari D. The Outsider Walk, Verikin Station, Venathi Broadcast Consortium, Segment 14. The response split further. Half the audience appreciated the self-deprecating turn, the willingness to let the comedian become his own subject. The other half accused Desk of sentimentality, of going soft on a species that was, by every objective metric, less advanced than the consortium's baseline. Desk did not engage with either camp. He had learned from the humans that some things did not require a response. 4 months after the special aired, he received a communication from Verikin Station. It was from Tomas. 4 words, "Still got your cup." Desk understood immediately. He had left his coffee cup, a Venathi ceramic piece, hand-finished, with his family crest etched into the base on Tomas's counter on his last morning. He had not noticed its absence until Fennec pointed out the gap in his personal inventory during transit home. He had assumed it lost. Tomas had kept it for 4 months. Not because it was valuable, not because keeping it served a purpose. Tomas had kept it because it belonged to someone, and that someone might want it back. And in the human commercial quarter of Verikin Station, that was reason enough. Desk composed a reply. It took him longer than any line he had ever written for a special. He went through 6 drafts, each progressively shorter, each shedding one more layer of Venathi rhetorical sophistication, until what remained was 5 words in plain consortium standard. "I'll come get it myself." He did. 3 weeks later, he walked into Market Row without cameras, without a premise, carrying nothing but a travel bag and the particular lightness of a person who has stopped pretending that sophistication is the same as understanding. The market smelled the same. Coffee and frying oil and thermal composite dust, and the faint metallic tang of station air that had been cycled one too many times. The noise was the same, human voices overlapping, a burst of laughter from the cargo bay end, the rhythmic scraping of Vasily's hand tool somewhere overhead. Tomas saw him from across the stall. He did not look surprised. He reached under the counter and placed the cup on the table, the Venathi ceramic piece, family crest visible, clean, as though it had been washed and set aside that morning, though Desk knew it had been set aside 4 months ago. Tomas poured coffee into it. They sat in the early morning quiet, drinking coffee, not speaking. Marta waved from her stall without interrupting. Vasily nodded from his overhead perch. The medic Reyes walked past with a medical kit and said, "Welcome back," without breaking stride, as though Desk's return was neither remarkable nor unexpected, but simply another fact about the morning. The silence was the kind that only exists between 2 people who have discovered, through the slow process of paying attention, that the other one is real. Desk stayed for 2 weeks on that second visit. He did not record anything. He helped Tomas unpack inventory and learned the logic of stocking shelves by use case atmospheric products near the climate control aisle, hull materials near the structural bay, medical supplies within reach of the clinic. He learned that the logic was not a system. It was a courtesy. The products were where the customers expected them to be, because Tomas had watched where customers looked first and rearranged accordingly. He ate empanadas for lunch every day. On the third day, Marta gave him a brief, flat tutorial on crimping technique. His first empanada was misshapen. Marta looked at him and said, "It'll taste the same. Ugly food is still food." He ate it. She was right. He helped Reyes reorganize the clinic's supply cabinet and discovered that she sorted medications not by chemical category, but by patient, each shelf labeled with a species name and the common conditions she treated. "The pharmaceutical index sorts by compound," she explained. "I sort by who walks through my door." He drank terrible coffee every morning. He was developing genuine appreciation for it, not the taste, which remained aggressive, but the ritual. The act of sitting with a cup, watching the market open, letting the first hour of the day arrive without optimization or scheduling or algorithmic pre-planning. Just coffee and quiet and the sound of a market waking up. Once, when a Palathi customer could not pay for a critical repair part, a humidity regulator coupling that her station's operations depended on desks, covered the cost himself. Tomas looked at him. "You don't have an account," Tomas said. "I do now." Tomas recorded the amount in his notebook, under Desk's name, in ink. On his last morning, Desk stood at the edge of Market Row and watched the human quarter come alive, vendors opening stalls, customers arriving, the noise rising like a tide nobody tried to manage, because managing it would mean dampening it, and dampening it would mean losing something that no algorithm could replicate. He composed his final observation, the one that would become the closing line of his next special, the one that won him his third Palathine crest, and that the cultural feeds would debate for years. "I've spent my career in the space between what people believe and what's true, and then I went to a human market and met a species where there is no space. What they believe and what they do are the same thing. They shake your hand and they mean it. They remember your name, and it's not a strategy. They keep your cup for 4 months because it's yours and you might want it back." He paused, his skin held steady. "I came to find the joke. The joke is that we stopped doing this. We built the most sophisticated systems in the galaxy and used them to forget what a handshake means. The most advanced thing I encountered on Market Row was a woman making empanadas from her grandmother's recipe. And the reason it's advanced is that she's been doing it every day, the same way, with the same care, for 30 years, and she will never optimize it, because optimization is not the point." He took a last sip of coffee. It was still terrible. He was developing a taste for it. The point is showing up. Years later, when interviewers asked Desk Olari about the turning point in his career, the moment his comedy shifted from looking down to looking in, he would describe a specific morning on Verikin Station. Not the empanada, not the handshake, not the humidity regulator or the carpenter's scarred hands or the medic who sang to a child in a language neither of them spoke. He would describe the moment Tomas placed his cup on the counter, 4 months after he had left it behind, and poured coffee into it without a word. "That was the funniest thing I ever saw," Desk would say. "A man who remembered." The interviewer would always wait for the punchline. There was never one.